Chapter 4, Merribeth. So, did you get to meet the new manager? I heard he's hunky. Merribeth looked up at Becky, her partner for the day, as she removed the sheets from the king-sized bed. Yeah, I met him. That was rather an understatement, as they had dated all through high school, and she'd thought they would get married until he decided he had to get out of Courage, Colorado, and had broken up with her. And, come on, don't leave me hanging in suspense. Is he nice? Cute? Becky was one of the younger maids and as boy-crazy as they came. Merribeth didn't mind being paired up with her, but the girl talked about a new guy every time they worked together. Now she pleaded with her baby blue eyes for Merribeth to spill. I guess he's nice. I didn't talk to him for that long, but at least he doesn't seem to want to shake things up too badly. Of course, she wondered if that would apply to her. Now that he knew she worked here, would he want to get rid of her? Great. Nice. That's a wonderful description. With that command of vivid imagery, you should be an author. Becky rolled her eyes. Now, come on. Tell me if he's easy on the eyes. She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively as she balled up the sheet and tossed it in their bin. Does he have broad shoulders, a trim waist, visible muscles? A soft heat crept across Merribeth's face. Chance's handsome features had been seared in her memory for ages. The chiseled jaw, the cleft in his chin, the chocolate brown eyes. And though he was older, he certainly wasn't any less handsome. But he'd broken things off with her. He'd told her she would be better off without him and left. She'd spent months hoping he would change his mind and staring at the phone, willing it to ring, but it never had. So she'd moved on, but she definitely hadn't been better off without Chance. Still, even if she still harbored a torch for him, which she clearly didn't, he was now her boss. Dating a boss was definitely off limits. I suppose, but dating where you work is never a good idea, and dating a boss is even worse. Becky shook her head, sending her blonde hair rustling against her shoulders. Oh, I don't know about that. I dated the shift supervisor at my first job. It might not have been a match made in heaven, but it was my first real relationship, and it was pretty amazing. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to dating a boss, especially the manager of a place like this. He has to be making good money. Besides, love doesn't always play by our rules. While Merribeth couldn't imagine dating someone solely for their money, she could certainly agree that love didn't always play by the rules. If it did, she would have been married to Chance instead of Lucas's father. Of course, she had known that he was a person she shouldn't get involved with. He had the bad boy image down to a T. But he'd managed to charm her and convince her to take a chance on him. She liked to think her guard had simply been down because of her broken heart, but regardless, the damage had been done. So maybe there was something to be said for sticking to her rules. But she hoped one day she would find what her parents had. Even though her father was gone and her mother had remarried, a wistful smile still crossed her mother's face whenever she talked about Merribeth's father, and the two had held hands whenever they went out together until the very end. Merribeth had no doubt they had been wildly in love. As she turned to sanitize the table, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A feeling of dread flooded her. No one ever called her except Edith. Pulling the phone out, she pressed the call button, hoping it was nothing serious. Hello? Merribeth, you have to come get Lucas. His temperature just hit 100, and you know my rule. Merribeth glanced at her watch. It was almost 3. She just needed 2 more hours to finish out her shift. Can't he just stay until 5, Edith? I'm almost done for the day. The condescension in Edith's voice was palpable, even over the phone. No, he cannot. I run a daycare center, not a doctor's office. He's probably already infected the other kids, but I can't go making exceptions or everyone will expect them." Merribeth sighed. It was an exception, she supposed, but she was honestly just hoping for some compassion. Most of the other kids at the daycare came from two-parent families. Though it was never easy to take off work, it was definitely easier when you weren't the sole breadwinner. "Okay, Edith, I'll be there as soon as I can." She shoved the phone back in her pocket and flashed an apologetic smile at Becky. "I'm so sorry, Becky. My son is sick and I have to go pick him up." The compassion she had hoped for from Edith crossed Becky's friendly face. "Go, take care of your boy. I remember sick kids." Merribeth's forehead crinkled in confusion. Becky was so young, and she'd been fairly certain the woman had no children. "Not my own, of course." Becky laughed as if she'd just realized what she'd said. "My mom had 7 kids, though, and I was the oldest. I think I stayed home with my brothers and sisters when they were sick more than she did. Anyway, don't worry, we're almost done here and I can finish up." "Are you sure? I'll make it up to you somehow." She had no idea how she would ever make it up to her friend, as she had little to offer, but she would try. "I'm sure. I may not have kids yet, but I can't imagine being a single mother, and I'm happy to help. Go, get out of here." Becky waved a hand to shoo her away. "Thank you." Merribeth pulled the younger woman in for a quick hug before hurrying out the door. Unfortunately, her job paid on a time clock, and in order to clock out early, she had to get approval, which meant asking the new manager. Normally, that wouldn't be that big of an issue for her, but now her new boss was also her ex-boyfriend, which created a whole complicated mess. Plus, she wasn't sure she was ready to tell him about her son. She paused outside his door as she tried to decide what to say. Honesty was always the best policy, but did she really want Chance knowing how wrong her life had turned out? Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the doorframe. Chance glanced up, smiled, and waved her in. "I was hoping you would come by." Merribeth's brow furrowed. "You were? Why?" He blinked, as if that was a stupid question. "Because I haven't seen you in years. I had no idea you were working here." He folded his hands together and leaned forward. "So, how have you been? What have you been up to?" Merribeth bit the inside of her lip as she thought about the words she wanted to say. "I've not been great, to tell you the truth. After you left me brokenhearted, I fell for the wrong guy, married him, and had a son. He became verbally abusive and then decided he didn't want to be a father any longer. I'm not even sure my son remembers his dad. Now I'm working as a single mother, barely making ends meet, and I don't know if I'll be able to afford to buy my son a Christmas present." Yeah, there was no way she was telling him the whole truth. She took a deep breath and decided to avoid most of his question. "I've been okay, but actually I'm here because I need to see if I can take the rest of the day and tomorrow off. I know it's your first day and this is a terrible first impression, but I can't help it." He lifted an eyebrow as he regarded her. Had he noticed she avoided his questions? Was he going to press her for an answer? Leaning back, he stroked his chin. Though she didn't want to, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the gesture. She remembered stroking that same chin, usually right before she leaned in to kiss. Nope. That train of thought needed to stop right now. His lips had been off limits for years, and just because they were now in the same zip code as hers again, did not mean she could start fantasizing about them again. "It is an unusual request for a new manager, but I know you wouldn't ask if you didn't have a good reason, so I'm assuming you do." The direct question of her reason hadn't been posed, but she could feel it hanging in the air between them. Now was the moment of truth. Did she tell him about her son? Quickly, she ran through possibilities in her head, but there was no way to avoid the question without lying, and she didn't want to do that. Sighing slightly, she met his gaze and opted for the truth. My daycare just called, and my son has a fever. The rules are that he has to be picked up and can't return until the fever's been gone for at least 24 hours. That means I'll have to take off tomorrow to stay home with him. Hopefully it's nothing serious, and I'll be back on Monday. As she'd expected, the news of her son shocked Chance. His lips parted, and he blinked at her as if at a loss for words. Finally, he swallowed and rubbed a hand across his neck. Though he tried to look composed, the hitch in his voice gave him away. You have a son? How old is he? He just turned 5, so unfortunately he missed getting into kindergarten this school year, hence the daycare. She could see questions forming in his eyes, but she hoped he wouldn't ask about Lucas's father. Telling him that she had chosen the wrong man after he left her held about as much appeal as getting a root canal. Thankfully, he went a different direction. Does your son get sick often? She hadn't expected that one, but she supposed she should have. He was her employer now, after all. And it was the common question employers asked when they found out you had kids. How many days were they going to have to grant for a sick child? Merribeth shook her head. Hardly ever, and when he does, it's always a quick recovery. You can check my employee file. I don't think I even used all my sick days last year. Chance smiled and shook his head. Relax, Merribeth. You're fine. I just wanted to know if I could help in any way. Help? Really? After he'd ripped her heart out and left her? Perhaps he was feeling guilty and trying to make amends. Or maybe he had gotten injured in the line of duty and forgotten what he'd done to her. Either way, she did not need his pity. She'd had to find her inner strength in the last few years, and she would call on it now. No, thank you, we'll be fine. Just the time will be perfect. Then you've got it. He grabbed a notepad from the desk and scribbled something down before tearing off the sheet and handing it to her. That's my number. Call me if you won't be back Monday, and we'll figure something out. I'll get someone to cover your shift tomorrow. Merribeth blinked. Had he really just given her his personal number? Did he think they were going to be friends again? Or was this something he would have done for any employee? Thank you? She took the paper and shoved it in her pocket before offering a small wave and exiting the office. As she walked to the employee lounge to grab her things, she couldn't help going over the interaction again. What exactly had happened in there? She supposed it was possible he could have forgotten the way he treated her, but it seemed much more likely that he was trying to make up for it. While she appreciated the time off, she certainly hadn't forgotten the past, nor had she forgiven him. They would definitely have to have a conversation soon, but not right now. Right now, she needed to get her son. 20 minutes later, she pulled into Edith's drive, surprised the woman wasn't waiting on the porch for her. Perhaps the chill in the air was keeping her inside. The news had said another snowfall was headed their way, and Merribeth could feel it in the air as she hurried up the steps. The door swung open seconds after her knock, and Lucas hurried out to her. His face was flushed, but his eyes looked bright and clear. Unsure what that meant, Merribeth hoped it was nothing worse than a cold. It had been hard enough to ask Chance for 2 days off. She didn't want to have to ask for more. He can't come back until 24 hours after his fever breaks. I know, Edith. Merribeth swallowed the unchristian words that rose in her throat and forced a small smile instead as she signed the iPad to check Lucas out. I promise I won't bring him back sick. I wouldn't have brought him this morning if I'd known he was going to get a fever. Edith's chest puffed out, a sure sign she was agitated. Well, I just have to remind parents, one sick kid can shut the whole place down for weeks, especially in the winter with the flu going around, and I can't afford to be shut down that long. Merribeth understood that completely. She couldn't afford to be out of work that long either, especially with Christmas coming so soon. But Edith didn't seem to care about that. Have a good weekend, Edith. I'll let you know if he's better for Monday. Placing her arm around Lucas, she leaned down to whisper in his ear, "Come on, buddy. Let's get you home and see if we can get you feeling better." "I don't feel bad, Mommy. I was just playing really hard." Sadness ringed Lucas's eyes as she placed him in his car seat. "Don't worry about it. I was able to get tomorrow off. Maybe if you feel better, we can go see Holly." She buckled him in and then ruffled his hair before shutting the door. Holly was her best friend and her sounding board with her parents gone. Ironically, they had met at Merribeth's father's funeral. Holly ran a small restaurant and catering business, and Merribeth's mother had hired her to provide food for the funeral. They had become fast friends after that, and she couldn't wait to tell her friend that her ex-boyfriend was her new boss. A small smile tugged at the corners of Merribeth's lips as she pictured how that conversation might go. The feisty former New Yorker was sure to have a plethora to say on that subject.